Hey tarot friends, it's Dustin from Modern Metaphysicate, and today I thought we could hang out and take a trip through the Ananda Tarot. This is an out-of-print deck that was released in the late 90s, early 2000s. The English edition, I believe, is from 2002, 2003, and it is something that's pretty difficult and challenging to get your hands on these days. And through the graciousness of a person in our community, I was able to have this deck come into my life, and I'm so very, very thankful to that person for helping get this deck in my collection. I don't remember if they said it was okay or not if I say their name, so we're going to err on the side of caution and just say, you know who you are, and I just want to say thank you so much because I have been loving this deck. As always, down in the description box below, I'll put more information about this deck, along with all of my own social media posts and a link to my personal website if you're interested in booking a reading with me. So be sure to check all of that out at the end of the video. So, the Ananda Tarot. Like I said, this is an out-of-print deck, and it is pretty challenging to get a hold of. And I first saw this, I believe it was through a Fortune's Wheelhouse post. They do these posts in their Facebook group of what they call basically like tarot spells, and it's usually a couple cards and then, you know, like an interpretation. It's really cool. If you're unfamiliar with Fortune's Wheelhouse, it's this really fantastic esoteric tarot related podcast by T. Susan Chang and M. Moline. I'll put a link to that down below as well so you can check it out. But I saw the artwork and I was like, wow, that is absolutely gorgeous. And it reminded me so much of art that I saw on, you know, my favorite science fiction novels and fantasy novels and tabletop role-playing games and all of that kind of stuff when I was growing up in the, you know, in the 90s and the early 2000s. And it just really connected with me. And so, of course, then I proceeded to look for the deck, finding out that I was out of print. And then, of course, it's one of those that is exorbitantly expensive. And so I kind of wrote it off, and I had mentioned it in our Three Fat Readers discussion about our most wanted tarot decks. And I'll put a link to that up here in the cards, as well as down below, so you can check that out. And someone in the community reached out and said, I have a copy of this and I would be willing to trade it to you for some things. And we worked out a deal, and I'm very happy and elated to have this in my collection. So thank you for helping make this a reality. So let's dive into this. It was published in Germany originally by AGM, and then in 2003 is when the English version was released, and that's the version we have here. Now, this is not the box that it comes in. Obviously, that's the book. The box that it comes in is like one of those like classic blockbuster style boxes that AGM did there for a while. It's a little beat up. This happened long before it came to me, but that's okay. I still love it no matter what. So that's the box. Nothing crazy. I have to admit, though, I'm very glad that AGM doesn't put decks in those kind of boxes anymore. Now, that being said, it does come with this amazing guidebook. The guidebook is really detailed, and it's big. It's a chunky, beefy guidebook. And it doesn't have like the usual nonsense in it. And by nonsense I mean it doesn't spend a lot of time talking about you know, other decks and things like that. It's strictly just about this deck. There's no advertising in it. There is a brief introduction and then lots of details about the card, the imagery on the card, the astrological associations, traditional meanings and keywords, specifically meanings for this deck, which I thought was really cool. So there's the meaning per the creator, and then of course the traditional meaning. And I like having that juxtaposition because you get a sense of how significant certain things are to the creator when they put things like that in the guidebooks. And then of course in the back here we have some spreads and things like that, which is always pretty cool to have. Nothing too crazy. Some very traditional ones, some non-traditional ones that are unique to this book and things like that. But I thought that was fantastic. Some very cool stuff. And then a little blurb about the author and the artist, who is Ananda Kurt Pilz or Pilz. I'm not sure how to say that. I'm assuming it's Pilz because it's German, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure whether or not he is still with us. I'm assuming he is. He was born in 1955, so he's probably about as old as my parents. But I can't find a whole lot about him, and this web address that he has listed in here for his stuff is no longer working. So if anyone knows anything about the artist and if he's still around, let me know in the comments below, because I couldn't seem to dig anything up. That being said, though, he is a pretty well-known graphic and digital artist who worked on book covers and music album covers and things like that. So that is a little bit about that. Now, let's talk about the cards themselves. So the cards are pretty standard cardstock for the time. They are just like your standard US Games cards that we get right now. They have a semi-gloss finish. They're nice and slightly bendy, but not too thick. Pretty standard cardstock. Nothing crazy, nothing mind-blowing. In terms of size, they are a standard tarot size. So as you can see here, completely standard tarot size. So that is that. And the artwork, the backs are lovely. They kind of have like this fractal effect, which I kind of like. Again, you can see the copyright date here, 2003, AGM Urania. And then the fronts and the artwork are just beautiful. So the artwork is very, very ethereal, I guess is the best word that I would use to describe it. It's gorgeous, and I really, really love it. And we'll do our usual flip through, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the cards that I really specifically love and what I think about the artwork and things like that. So sit back, grab a cup of tea, and let's check out the Ananda Tarot. So that is the Ananda Tarot. It's stunning and beautiful, and as you can see, it definitely does take a departure from the traditional RWS system, right? Our Fool is not without number here. He is featured as key 22, which of course we do see in other decks traditionally and historically. Obviously the deck leans more into historical systems than the more modern, Thoth or RWS system. It reminds me a lot of Marseille systems. There are some sort of nods and things like that to RWS. It feels very heavily influenced by a lot of different systems, in fact. One of the things that struck me, a lot of people seem to have issues with the swords, but, even here in the Seven of Swords, we have that snake, right? So we still get that idea of thievery. But, for the most part, the swords and all of the suits are very almost pippish. The scenes are not dramatically telling of a story in the same way that we're used to seeing in decks like the RWS. So in that sense, it definitely leans more towards things like the Golden Dawn tradition and the Thoth. So it's very unique, and the meanings themselves that I see in the book follow more closely a lot of the traditional meanings that we see. There are some variations and things like that, but like I said, one of the things that is interesting about the deck and the creator itself is that he did choose to include some of the more traditional meanings and things like that. So having both of those together, I thought was really fantastic. I love this Five of Spheres. Obviously, this represents the Five of Coins, which, typically we see this card from a different light, and this is almost kind of like the after, I guess, of what you would see in a traditional RWS, which is something more like this, right? But again, it leans into other traditions and things like that. So I love the blending here. It's very much a tarot melting pot, I guess, is the point that I'm trying to get at, which I really thought was unique and fascinating. The artwork itself is gorgeous. It is, of course, all digital art, but it's not digital art in the same way that we get today. This is very, very masterfully done and very well executed. Everything is done with a purpose. The color palette is very intentional and specifically chosen for things, both for cards and, the symbolic meaning behind those cards. I love the color palette of this Emperor. It is very evocative of the traditional RWS. We still get the same sort of symbols and things present. Eagles, however, instead of ram's heads. We still have the river, though, which I think is often overlooked in the RWS version of the card. A lot of people seem to miss the river in the Emperor card. I don't know if I have an Emperor that's super handy here. Let's see if we get lucky. We'll take a peruse through this deck really quickly and see if we can't find one for comparison. Maybe. But there is a river that it sits behind the Emperor's throne in the Emperor and the RWS, and it's a little bit of symbolism. Here we go. That I think some people tend to miss, right? It's just this very subtle blue line back there. And I think it's one of those things that this card really kind of brings to the forefront, right? And really brings to your attention, right? When we talk about symbolism and things like that within cards, especially like the elements, water and fire, that juxtaposition of those two things, right? There's obviously intentional meaning behind that. And if you're interested in that kind of symbolism and things like that, I have done a series in the channel, I'll link it up here in the cards, about tarot symbolism, color symbolism, elemental symbolism, and things like that. So be sure to check that out. But the artwork is just stunning and beautiful, and it really, really challenges me as a reader because of how much of a melting pot it is. It really makes me dive into all of the systems that I've learned in order to read it, and it's not something I've really read for anyone, any clients or anything like that with. I've specifically only been reading with this for myself because of that, because it's challenging for me. It makes me dig into a lot of different places and sources to tap into what the reading has to say, as well as my intuition, right? And that's the thing that I really loved about this deck and the artwork, is that it really triggered something inside of me that seemed like a culmination of a lot of the things that I have been studying for the past umpteen years now. With the tarot, I saw so many different facets of the tarot expressed in this one deck, and it absolutely fascinated me, and still does fascinate me, how, you know, the artist and creator of this deck seemed to capture all of that in one cohesive format, which I just think is absolutely beautiful and stunning. So the aces in this deck are just wonderful. Look at this Ace of Cups. It's just beautiful. So yeah, I'm very thankful to have this as a part of my collection now. I think it's definitely going to be a deck that challenges me and helps me to grow and learn as a tarot reader, not only for other people, but specifically for myself. I feel like this is a really personal deck for me that I'm gonna get a lot out of personally. It's already given me some pretty like woo kind of readings. I love that the Hangman in this card, or in this deck, is called Reverse. I just think that was such a really interesting choice of title for that card. It's, you know, it's very evocative of a lot of different things. But yeah, there's just so much in this deck that I just really adore. I also really like the fact that the Hermit in this deck he appears to be almost like a cartomancer, right? He's got this deck of cards falling, but he's also got a few other things, right? He's got you definitely get the sense that it is the Magician, right? It's a continuation of the Magician, which I really, really, really loved. And the interesting thing for me is that the Magician and the High Priestess in this deck, let's see if I can kind of get them all together. Oh, I can't. Oh, the reflection. No. The Magician and the High Priestess, right? There's definitely a through line here. Obviously, there's some wardrobe choices, but you definitely get the sense that this is all kind of embodying the same kind of person or idea. They're very like gender non-conformist, right? This could be a man or a woman. Same with the Magician, which I think is really fascinating. And then of course with the Hermit here, you have, the cup, you have the sphere, you have the flames represented in his hands. The only thing that really isn't represented is a sword, which I thought was interesting, but it's just a really beautiful interpretation of the Hermit that I personally really connected with. The Hermit is my birth card, so any Hermit card that I see where it's representative of someone more my age, being a hermit both in life and as having it as a birth card, and having so many connections and ties to the Hermit and its energy and things like that, this one it was a home run for me, and I really appreciated it. So yeah, I could go on and on about how beautiful this deck is and how many amazing little nuggets of symbolism and just beauty that they have packed into these cards. But I would love to hear what you think of this deck in the comments below. Let me know. If you have this deck and you read with it, let me know what you think about it. How does it challenge you? What have you learned from it? Things like that. I love hearing those things from my viewers. So please, please, please drop a comment down below. And as always, if you have any questions for me or want to reach out and just get in touch, feel free to put a comment down below or send me an email or reach out to any of my social media platforms that I have listed in the description box below. As always, I just want to say thank you so much for all your continued love and support. And remember, everyone is fighting a battle that you know nothing about. So be kind, always. Bye, everybody.